I love the topic. I think that if we will really explore through this whole weekend, extended weekend, we'll come away with a sense, a renewed sense, I think, more than ever, of how connected we are and how responsible we are to each other, for each other's welfare and well-being. And as we're concerned about each other, then we grow. So it's really a super topic. And then the fact that science is beginning to confirm what we have been teaching and understanding is a real nice mesh. I know that Victor Gostin wrote an article just in the last Theosophy. I was interested in reading it. And he talked about the solar waves and the energy waves that go through the universe and through the cosmos, and that it's not empty space, as people once thought, but an interconnected network. And now, in addition to black holes, there are white holes. So every time we think we've learned something, we learn something more, and it becomes more complex, not simpler. And as Hamlet said in Shakespeare's writing, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. And I think as we explore this, we will continue to see that. And Thich Nhat Hanh, I recently ran across an article by him in which he said that you've got to be able to see the sun in a piece of paper, because if you cannot have the paper without a tree, and you cannot have a tree without the earth and the water and the sun. And it continues on, but whenever you see one thing, you should see a multiple things because of the interconnection. So that is sort of my pre-introduction. But to get on to the subject of science and Akasha, that's what we're going to be exploring. And I will admit that I'm a novice. I'm not a scientist, but I love to explore these ideas, and I hope to inspire you to seek further and have a different concept of the world in which we live. And I think as we work through the weekend, I love the range of topics that you've got, that it's going to come to it from all angles. And this is a Shakespearean quote that I think is very beautiful. Some people have applied it to Faust, but I don't know. But I think perhaps this is FOHAT, weaving in and out and around Akasha, which is the cosmic web of manifestation, the garment by which we humans see or experience God. And I think that's a beautiful, poetic way of saying it. And we're going to explore the interconnectedness of all of life and the environment, with a focus on Akasha and correlations with current science, and certainly speaking using theosophical writings, particularly from Madame Blavatsky, who he said was the one of the founders. And this is my confession. When I was thinking about talking on Akasha, Pablo Sender, whom many of you may be familiar with because he's done many webcasts and seminars and so forth, he said he's tried speaking on Akasha one time and it was a total failure. So I thought, uh-oh, it can only go downhill from there. But he did say that we don't have to be entertaining either, so take this as a way to explore within yourself what we're learning. And So, as I know nothing but, it's a very interesting topic. And this is the book that I primarily got my scientific information from. I recommend it highly, Science in the Akashic Field, and it was reviewed in the Theosophy. It's, even if you're not scientific, but if you're interested in correlations with science, Irvin Laszlo does a beautiful job of making it understandable to the layperson, and that is a very great skill. In fact, I think he said many things better than I could, so if you're interested, continue on with that. And but with your kind assistance and thinking, I will try to connect the global aspects of consciousness with the individual experience that we have. And I want to convince you, and this is the purpose of the talk, to convince you of its import for your life. After all, anything we learn, if we don't apply it, it's not valuable. And so I have this quote from a medical doctor, and he continues saying, "Are some of us occasionally able to tap into this Akashic information bank with some facility, and perhaps all of us to some extent now and then, such as precognition, psychic crime solving that we have seen examples of, even psychic spying, and personal connections that we immediately see with people." So he, like a number of scientists, are recognizing that there is some background, some underlying that connects and influences all of creation. We have called it Akasha, and that is a Sanskrit term. It's long been used in Hindu and Sanskrit, but now sometimes scientists are picking it up and they're calling it the A-Field. Sounds much more official if it's the A-Field. So let's look at the term Akasha. It's may be familiar to you. Does anybody want to say what you think it means? I'll leave that open. Just say a word. What is Akasha?
Memory.
What?
A memory.
A memory. All right, that's one.
Recording.
A recording.
Vibration.
Vibration. Frequency. And actually, the Sanskrit word originally means brilliance, or radiation, or sky. And Blavatsky used it, and used a term ether, but often would use both terms, ether or Akasha. But it is the most significant of the 5 basic elements of creation: earth, air, fire, water, and it was said ether, but it's really Akasha, and it's that cosmic web that through which all other things are manifest, going back to that loom in the very beginning quote, which was so beautiful. And Edgar Cayce, many of you are familiar with his writings, which I encountered early in my theosophical career. According to Edgar Cayce, he says the Akashic records, or Book of Life, and that's where you're getting the recording and memory and so forth, can be equated to the universe's supercomputer system. And the system acts as a central storehouse for all information for every individual who's ever lived on Earth. And it's more than just a reservoir of events. It contains every deed, word, feeling, thought, and intent. Think about that. Everything you think about is somewhere out in the ether forever. Trump, eat your heart out. And not only that, not only is it recording, which everybody's more familiar with, but it is interactive. It is an interactive web that has influence on our everyday lives and our relationships, our feelings, and the potential realities that we draw toward us. All of this is like this web of consciousness, the universe. And moreover, Edgar Cayce says that the entire history of every soul is on this, recorded since the dawn of creation, and they connect us to one another. It also is the source of all myths because we relate to this global memory, and also to magic, because it is this field of consciousness. And this is what we live in, this is what we breathe in. This is how we experience deja vu and connections, intuitive connections. We're connecting with that Akashic record. It also, when we react to somebody in a negative way, it's because there's something in which we connect with those vibes that are in the consciousness that we do not resonate with. So Akasha is the unbiased judge and jury recording everything that attempts to guide, educate, transform every individual to be the very best that they can be. So it is that fluid transmission of karma as well. Good grief. What can it be, and how can science connect with it? How can it be so accurate and yet fluid and responsive in effect? It seems to be like it's this vast superconsciousness in which all creation unfolds. A web, a network, a framework for all that is. It responds, it remembers, it nourishes, it guides, and it is us. To look at some of the metaphors that are in the Secret Doctrine and realize that much that was written in the Secret Doctrine was metaphor, we're going to look at how the metaphor can be confirmed by some of the scientific ideas. In the stanzas on cosmic creation, HPB, which is what we call Madame Blavatsky, tells us that all that is can be compared to an ocean of immortality. She goes on to tell us that at the very earliest stages of creation, the father-mother energy spins a cosmic web of spirit matter, ranging at its densest point as matter to its finest point as subtle spirit. And she uses the term SVÅBHAVAT. Are you familiar with that term? Many of you are probably not. In my understanding, SVÅBHAVAT is like that essence of becoming and unfolding and continually unfolding and becoming what it is to be. And in fact, it makes me think of what was said when Moses asked God what his name was, and he said, "I am that I am." And sometimes it can be translated, "I am becoming as that is which is becoming." So I think it's very much connected with that term. It's a very interesting Sanskrit term. And on this web, the intelligent force called FOHAT acts to create the initial atoms, the building blocks of all manifested creation, And the stanza goes on to say that each part of this web reflects the self-existent Lord like a mirror. And this is Shiva. In Hindu mythology, the god Shiva is involved in this creation process. And Shiva is associated with each one of the 5 elements that I mentioned: earth, air, fire, water, and Akasha. And most of us are familiar with this particular image of Shiva, although it's not the only one. This is Shiva's dance within the fiery cosmic dance within the fiery circle, the dance of energy. And this particular image is found in the Shiva temple dedicated to Akasha. There are temples of earth dedicated to Shiva in the earth, fire, air, and water, and this is the image in Akasha. And this particular image is in the temple at Chittambaram, the temple to Akasha. So the flames at the edges may represent the dynamic connections at each point of the cosmic web, or even the energy of FOHAT. And there's a story about Shiva, who was assigned the task of keeping track of everything that was going on in the whole of creation. And it was a tiring task, and Shiva wasn't always so energetic, although you see it in the cosmic dance, there's some energy going on, but wanted to do other things. So he decided to throw a web over all of creation. And that would keep him in touch with everything that was going on. It would keep him informed. Maybe that was his version of Facebook, which is how you got here, so it worked. But prior to such technology, he placed little receptive reflectors at each connection throughout the entire cosmic web. And some have said that they were like little bells, that when one of the bells was disturbed, every bell throughout the entire web that had resonated to that sound would ring. Some others have said it was that they were like teardrops, and some have said like dewdrops, or crystals that echo the images like continuing mirrors, sending the image thrilling through the shimmer of the universe. And Ray Grassi said in a Quest article, which I really liked, that the cosmic web of jewels at every nodal point reflects the entire net, thus expressing that quality of both wholeness and individuality all at once. Each of us is a jewel in that net, and every one of us is a microcosm of the entirety. So however we might imagine it, through sound or through reflections, whatever happens in one place impacts everything else. So we're in a vast, interconnected, alive system that shimmers in responsiveness. So that sounds really like a beautiful image, but what might we find in the scientific world? Now, we're finding that it's much more mysterious than the 19th century scientists thought, because in this strange universe of ours, particles appear and disappear at random, seemingly, and a human thought can affect how they act, and elements that are separated, that were once together, if they're separated, they will forever influence each other. And this interconnected web works on an inner level we're seeing, and it also must have correspondences on the external world that we know. So I have a TED Talk, a 10-minute section of a TED Talk that I'm going to show you that particularly would give you a graphic. It's the best graphic on seeing a web and the energy dancing on the web. So I will see if I can do this.
This particular idea, however, although we don't yet know whether it's right or wrong, and at the end I'll discuss experiments which in the next few years may tell us whether it's right or wrong, this idea has had a major impact on physics in the last century and continues to inform a lot of cutting-edge research. So I'd like to tell you something about the story of these extra dimensions. So where do we go? To begin, we need a bit of backstory. Go to 1907. This is a year when Einstein is basking in the glow of having discovered the special theory of relativity and decides to take on a new project to try to understand fully the grand pervasive force of gravity. And in that moment, there were many people around who thought that that project had already been resolved. Newton had given the world a theory of gravity in the late 1600s that works well, describes the motion of planets, the motion of the moon, and so forth, the motion of apocryphal apples falling from trees, hitting people in the head. All of that could be described using Newton's work, but Einstein realized that Newton had left something out of the story, because even Newton had written that although he understood how to calculate the effect of gravity, he had been unable to figure out how it really works. How is it that the sun, 93 million miles away, somehow it affects the motion of the Earth? How does the sun reach out across empty, inert space and exert influence? And that is a task to which Einstein set himself, to figure out how gravity works. And let me show you what it is that he found. So Einstein found that the medium that transmits gravity is space itself. The idea goes like this. Imagine space as a substrate of all there is. Einstein said space is nice and flat if there's no matter present. But if there is matter in the environment, such as the sun, it causes the fabric of space to warp, to curve, and that communicates the force of gravity. Even the Earth warps space around it. Now look at the moon. The moon is kept in orbit, according to these ideas, because it rolls along a valley in the curved environment that the sun and the moon and the Earth can all create by virtue of their presence. If we go to a full-frame view of this, the Earth itself is kept in orbit because it rolls along a valley in the environment that's curved because of the sun's presence. That is this new idea about how gravity actually works. Now, this idea was tested in 1919 through astronomical observations. It really works. It describes the data. And this gained Einstein prominence around the world. And that is what got Kaluza thinking. He, like Einstein, was in search of what we call a unified theory. That's one theory that might be able to describe all of nature's forces from one set of ideas, one set of principles, one master equation, if you will. So Kaluza said to himself, Einstein has been able to describe gravity in terms of warps and curves in space, in fact, space and time, to be more precise. Maybe I can play the same game with the other known force, which was at that time known as the electromagnetic force. We know of others today, but at that time, that was the only other one people were thinking about. You know, the force responsible for electricity and magnetic attraction and so forth. So Kaluza says, maybe I can play the same game and describe electromagnetic force in terms of warps and curves. That raised a question. Warps and curves in what? Einstein had already used up space and time, warps and curves, to describe gravity. There didn't seem to be anything else to warp or curve. So Kaluza said, well, maybe there are more dimensions of space. He said, if I want to describe one more force, maybe I need one more dimension. So he imagined that the world had 4 dimensions of space, not 3. And imagined that electromagnetism was warps and curves in that 4th dimension. Now here's the thing. When he wrote down the equations describing warps and curves in a universe with 4 space dimensions, not 3, He found the old equations that Einstein had already derived in 3 dimensions. Those were for gravity. But he found one more equation because of the one more dimension. And when he looked at that equation, it was none other than the equation that scientists had long known to describe the electromagnetic force. Amazing. It just popped out. He was so excited by this realization that he ran around his house screaming victory, that he had found the unified theory. Now, clearly, Kaluza was a man who took theory very seriously. In fact, there's a story that when he wanted to learn how to swim, he read a book, a treatise on swimming, then dove into the ocean. This is a man who would risk his life on theory. Now, but for those of us who are a little bit more practically minded, 2 questions immediately arise from his observation. Number 1, if there are more dimensions of space, where are they? We don't seem to see them. And number 2, does this theory really work in detail when you try to apply it to the world around us? Now, the first question was answered in 1926 by a fellow named Oscar Klein. He suggested that dimensions might come in 2 varieties. There might be big, easy-to-see dimensions, but there might also be tiny, curled-up dimensions, curled up so small, even though they're all around us, that we don't see them. Let me show you that one visually. So imagine you're looking at something like a cable supporting a traffic light. It's in Manhattan, your Central Park. It's kind of irrelevant. But the cable looks one-dimensional from a distant viewpoint. But you and I all know that it does have some thickness. It's very hard to see it, though, from far away. But if we zoom in and take the perspective of, say, a little ant walking around, little ants are so small that they can access all of the dimensions. The long dimension, but also this clockwise, counterclockwise direction. And I hope you appreciate this. It took so long to get these ants to do this. But this illustrates the fact that dimensions can be of 2 sorts, big and small, and the idea is that maybe the big dimensions around us are the ones that we can easily see, but there might be additional dimensions curled up, sort of like the circular part of that cable, so small that they have so far remained invisible. Let me show you what that would look like. So if we take a look, say, at space itself, I can only show, of course, 2 dimensions on a screen. Some of you guys will fix that one day. But anything that's not flat in the screen as a new dimension goes smaller, 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 and way down in the microscopic depths of space itself. This is the idea. You could have additional curled up dimensions. Here is a little shape of a circle, so small that we don't see them. But if you were a little ultra microscopic ant walking around, you could walk in the big dimensions that we all know about. That's like the grid part. But you could also access the tiny curled up dimension that's so small that we can't see it with the naked eye or even with any of our most refined equipment, but deeply tucked into the fabric of space itself, the idea is there could be more dimensions, as we see there. Now, that's an explanation about how the universe could have more dimensions than the ones that we see, but what about the second question that I asked? Does the theory actually work when you try to apply it to the real world? Well, it turns out that Einstein and Kaluza and many others worked on trying to refine this framework and apply it to the physics of the universe as was understood at the time, and in detail, it didn't work. In detail, for instance, they couldn't get the mass of the electron to work out correctly in this theory. So many people worked on it, but by the 40s, certainly by the 50s, this strange but very compelling idea of how to unify the laws of physics had gone away. Until something wonderful happened in our age. In our era, a new approach to unify the laws of physics is being pursued by physicists such as myself, many others around the world. It's called superstring theory, as you were indicating. And the wonderful thing is that superstring theory has nothing to do at first sight with this idea of extra dimensions. But when we study superstring theory, we find that it resurrects the idea in a sparkling new form. So let me just tell you how that goes. Superstring theory, what is it? Well, it's a theory that tries to answer the question, what are the basic, fundamental, indivisible, uncuttable constituents making up everything in the world around us? The idea is like this. So imagine we look at a familiar object, just a candle and a holder, and imagine that we want to figure out what it is made of. So we go on a journey deep inside the object and examine the constituents. So deep inside, we all know you go sufficiently far down, you have atoms. We also all know that atoms are not the end of the story. They have little electrons that swarm around a central nucleus with neutrons and protons. Even the neutrons and protons have smaller particles inside of them, known as quarks. That is where conventional ideas stop. Here is the new idea of string theory. Deep inside any of these particles, there is something else. The something else is this dancing filament of energy. It looks like a vibrating string. That's where the idea of string theory comes from. And just like the vibrating strings that you just saw in a cello can vibrate in different patterns, these can also vibrate in different patterns. They don't produce different musical notes. Rather, they produce the different particles making up the world around us. So if these ideas are correct, this is what the ultramicroscopic landscape of the universe looks like. It's built up of a huge number of these little tiny filaments of vibrating energy, vibrating in different frequencies. The different frequencies produce the different particles. The different particles are responsible for all the richness in the world around us. And there you see unification, because matter particles, electrons and quarks, radiation particles, photons, gravitons, are all built up from one entity. So matter and the forces of nature all are put together under the rubric of vibrating strings, and that's what we mean by a unified theory. And here...
Yeah. Okay, so you can see why I picked this particular bit, because it so clearly gives you the graphics of this string theory and how it came about and how it seems to echo what we have seen in the mythology of the symbolism of the secret doctrine. I've heard of the bubbles in Koilon before, but most of my theosophic life, but yet I couldn't find any quotes on it, so I don't know if I was looking correctly or spelling it correctly. But that's getting so close to what we have considered as being a theosophical perspective on the universe, and this is another indication of those balls of fire, and they're in motion, and some turning one way and some another. And this is a model from Leadbeater's drawings. He and Annie Besant did some psychic research, and this was what they came up with, what they thought they saw when they were seeing the smallest particles of atoms. Look how similar this is to those vibrating strings in the vibrating string theory. So it's really quite amazing, actually. And of course, they're not static the way the diagram would show, but they are that vibrating. I love the diagram, which is why I wanted to show it to you. And it's like a marquee that's got tiny light bulbs in it, and you see the words going across the marquee. Actually, the words don't exist, but they're the little flashes of energy that create the forms and shapes. And I think that's another way to think of it, as it's traversing through the cosmic web. And scientists are trying to connect these ideas to higher dimensional space, and as he showed, it goes smaller and smaller and smaller. And at this point, they're saying probably 10 dimensions plus 1 dimension of time, which would be 11 dimensions. And who knows, there may be many more than that. But it's interconnected particles from the tiniest to the largest, building larger and resonating with each other in a kind of symphony. And now this is where I'm going to jump off into some of what the scientists started with and where they've gone to. In the 1900s, scientists recognized that all space was filled with some sort of energy that slowed objects down, but they were wrong. It didn't work. The friction factor failed to materialize. So then they decided, after declaring, then they said that it's an empty vacuum because there's nothing there, there's no source of friction. Then they decided that perhaps that wasn't it, that there was a mysterious field, a field of fields, and GUT is a grand unifying theory, which was what Einstein was always looking for, and which they're coming closer to. They're finding a medium that contains the ZPF. Scientists love such things as that. The ZPF is the zero-point field, and this is a field of energy which has been identified as the source of energy that exists beyond absolute zero. Absolute zero being a thermal temperature. And all classical energy sources would disappear, and yet there is still an energy. And this zero-point field, and if you want to go more into it, I definitely recommend this book. But it is a super dense cosmic medium. It's an ultra-weak background, also a morphogenetic field, and I have a handout on the morphogenetic field. I won't get into it, but Rupert Sheldrake, who is a British theosophist, has done a lot of work and has identified what he considers the morphogenetic field, which is the influence across space between various species. A species develops a certain skill, and that skill transmits more than just physically, but transmits through this morphogenetic field. You've all heard the 100th monkey theory. Well, that was a metaphor for what is. It's not, they have said that the 100th monkey is not a fact in that sense, but it is true in that it's representing a truth. And that it is a real field that does produce results that the scientists are working on. So it is responsible for slowing and shrinking near the speed of light of objects, that there is a limit that this field represents, that limits, it's not like a ring past knot, that limits all of the universe. And one of the ways they identify it is by the escape of photons when electrons jump from one level of energy to the next, which is called a quantum leap. And when I was in college, in the 60s, early 60s, in chemistry class, in an experiment, we actually would be able to bombard atoms and get these little releases of light energy, and actually I did not realize that was the release of photons when energy was being released. And that was a very profound experiment, and we were coming close to very important ideas, but at the time it was just a fun thing to watch. Some of the impacts of this zero-point field, which is very close to AKASHA, it provides the stability of atoms and galaxies. It carries light. In other words, light, when it shines through space, doesn't exist, but then all of a sudden it will, if it hits an object, you can see the evidence of light. But this is the field that would carry that light. It carries all the forces of nature, pressure waves, and now they're saying when something happens in outer space, there are pressure waves that go through the entire universe. And it limits density from high to low. It carries information. It's quite an amazing field. So, not only does the field function in what we would call a physical way, but it also carries information, which carries us back to the very beginning, and it carries it instantaneously. This applies to the psychic phenomena as well as to the quantum level, in which particles that have been once connected to each other are always connected to each other. This is a picture just imagining DNA and morphogenetic man, reminding you of the Rupert Sheldrake information, but this field influences everything across all physical boundaries. And in fact, they're even finding that our DNA can be affected by our influences. We think DNA is just something we inherit and we have it one time and we're stuck with it. But our DNA can be influenced both by our experiences and by our environment. So it would indicate the dynamic nature of this interrelated universe. And consider the drawings and diagrams we have of angelic beings. Now, I know you're all familiar with Jeffrey Hodgson's, so I decided to include a different picture. This is one developed by Dora Kuntz in partnership with an artist, and you can see the similarities to Jeffrey Hodgson's. But you see, she was trying to depict swirling energy. It makes you think of those superstrings at some level. It's all energy playing on this vast matrix. And in like manner, so are we impacting our own bodies and the environment, and also the elementals and the whole Gaia immune system, the Earth's immune system. So thinking of correlations, theosophical correlations with some of these ideas of this vast network that is responsive and interconnected, it gives us a sense that there is a wholeness to everything, that all, as we are here together, and I've been talking with some of you, and honestly, there are connections from Siberia to America to South America to Poland, we are all so connected, and as transportation gets more so, we realize how interconnected we are. But it is one whole. We are one humanity. Also, we get a sense that as this is unfolding, in the process of unfolding, we have a sense of purpose, of growing, of developing. And with this sense of unity, we have to have compassion for one another because we are part of the whole thing. And we should feel inspired because there's meaning when we have purpose and meaning. It gives us an inspiration. Also, it gives us a sense of responsibility of how we act and think as we are impacting the whole. So let's take this idea with us and think about it for yourself and through the evening, and as we work through the different talks that people give, consider how these ideas will impact us in our lives. all things are influencing and being influenced by each other. And we are part of that influencing. We have a resilience, just as the field of consciousness responds to circumstances. It heals, it corrects, it modifies, it teaches. We are a part of that and supported by that. And as it receives from us, so it gives back in new and interesting ways. We're constantly creating our own future and opening up what the possibilities might be. So let's take this idea with us, and we're each a radiant sun that can shine and positively influence our world. While at the core, if we can remain peaceful, connected, unified, we will create and also be the recipient of a beneficent field of energy in which we live. May it be so. Okay, so I have these handouts and I'm open to questions and discussion. The scientists can probably tell me more than maybe tell us all more than what I have said. So, what would you like to ask and what would you like to discuss? Yes?
Betty, the 0 point field, is that close to the God particle?
The 0 point field is not a particle, so it wouldn't be what they would call a God particle, but it is as close as we can come. I think our understanding of it is as close as we can come to understanding this Akashic field, this A-field they're calling it, which is the field on which is a field of consciousness, in which all these little vibrating strings, and maybe they're referring to these vibrating strings as being the energy of God consciousness. I don't know, but I don't think one could ever say a particle is.
It's just the very thing.
Right, and they're beginning to have a sense that it may be more of a pulsating, something that collapses together and then falls apart again. But the one thing that we are finding more and more is that it is a vast consciousness of which we are all a part and which we connect to interiorly at deeper and deeper levels.
You were mentioning how the field sort of receives and absorbs and then also gives back. Do you think this is going to be how the process of karma, non-judgmental reciprocity might work?
Oh, I think absolutely so. I think that, as I have said, that it is instructive. It responds to us, so you push against it and you get pushed back, or you work with the flow and you move forward. And we're slow learners, but we gradually begin to realize that it works to everybody's advantage to work with that energy instead of counteracting it. That's a very good observation.
So Betty's taken us on quite a journey exploring AKASHA, or the A-Field. The A-Field, which science is recognizing now as the theory which unites everything, really. It's something that Theosophy has looked at since it was founded, really. Madame Blavatsky, when she wrote The Secret Doctrine, claims to have taken some of the information that she wrote from the Akashic field. Mm-hmm. So the Theosophist is not something that's new, but to be able to look at it from a scientific perspective, I think is amazing. And it shows us how really science is verifying very much a lot of the theosophical theory that we see today. So it's a mechanism for us to also understand some of the genuineness within Theosophy, the ancient wisdom.
And to realize that it is at every level, that it's not just one simple level, but that where we are, and then there are layers upon layers upon layers of possibility and understanding. Great. And I have 2 handouts, one on morphogenetic fields, if you're interested in that, and one just a lot of the quotes from this book that might trigger some of your thinking.
So feel free to come up and grab the handouts. Thank you very much.